I'd like now to welcome, swapping hands now, Professor Andrew Stirling, who's Professor of Science and Technology, Policy, at Sussex U, and he's going to be talking about unusual obstacles to acknowledging the obsolescence of nuclear power.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the discussion so far, which has been quite disturbing, but very interesting. So I work at a research outfit called SPRU, that stands for Science Policy Research Unit, and we study general issues around science and technology. So I want to take a bit of a step back from that point of view and just think about some of the implications of what we're talking about today with regard to nuclear, and in particular ask, why is it, especially in the UK, but more generally, that nuclear power, nuclear technologies in general, are simply not being allowed to go obsolete? So we've heard today Kate really eloquently on the general picture, really seriously problematic situation of nuclear power around the world. Ian just compellingly on the tragedies around the evacuation and radiation health. Rika fascinatingly on the post-Fukushima crisis in Japan. We've heard about phrases like mind-bogglingly stupid. That was a quote from earlier. We need a miracle. This is a kamikaze mission. This is the kind of language. And it's not just here. We hear this kind of language quite routinely, and not just from committed critics of nuclear power, but quite generally. So the question then is, alongside some other countries in the world, but to a particular extent I'll talk about, why is it that the UK government remains so intensely committed to civil nuclear power? Proportionately, the plan that's still supposedly on the books, 16 gigawatts, some earlier scales of the published scale of this is much larger than that. Proportionately, the UK committed plans are the largest compared to its system in the world for civil nuclear power. So why is this? And there's a tendency, forgive me, among critics, of whom I've been one for many years, also to take it for granted, well, the system is stupid. It's being stupid. But I think it's worth a bit of scrutiny, thinking, well, what happens if it's not stupid? What happens if it's actually it quite makes sense under a particular viewpoint? So I'll come to that, but just think about the UK situation and quite how odd it is in relation to the global energy picture. It's not just a matter of the catastrophic accident risk we've been hearing about, the expense and the human tragedy that we've heard about, or waste or proliferation, or terrorism, attack, targeting risks, but it's just look at the economic picture alone, supposedly the basis on which rational decisions are made in energy markets. And however one looks at it, one doesn't have to be a nuclear critic to see that it is now beyond contestation. Solar and wind power are massively cheaper than nuclear around the world. They're massively cheaper already. The costs, and it varies, you can pick, everyone can pick numbers from different sources, but it's not controversial also to show that nuclear costs are inexorably rising and renewable costs are precipitously dropping. So this is a situation now. In 2013 and every year since, investments worldwide in renewable energy, capital investments, have been larger than in fossil fuels and nuclear power put together. So we can in some ways lament this revolution not happening. It is happening around us in most parts of the world. Even in India and China, which we often hear brought to the fore, the scale of the renewable investments are massively larger than the nuclear investments in those same countries. In the UK, the government's own figures show this. The government's own figures show that the renewable resource in the UK is absolutely adequate to meet any foreseeable increase. And of course, we should not be increasing energy demand. Wind, solar, other renewables. The contracts for different issues last year showed really graphically how even now, well ahead of Hinkley Point coming on stream, the costs of offshore wind are just a bit over half now the costs that Hinkley Point will be when it's eventually built, if it's on budget. And onshore wind, which is effectively banned by British government policy at the moment, outside Scotland, is acknowledged to be, by government, the cheapest electricity generating source available. So it is very, very odd what is happening, and one doesn't have to be a critic to see the basis for this. Even if you include the costs of storage and integration, which are significant, can't be ignored, of intermittent supply, it's still the case that the existing cost advantage of renewables, wind, solar, is massively large enough to accommodate that. So if there ever was a case of obsolescence, this seems to be it. In any other sector, it's routine to acknowledge it. I mean, we take for granted armoured knights, steam engines, canals, dreadnoughts, zeppelins, they go obsolete. Every technology in the end goes obsolete. We disagree about details, but it's not a controversial thing to think of it as a possibility. Asbestos, heavy metals, chlorofluorocarbons have been run out because they're obsolete. So why is there not a debate about this to any scale in the UK? Instead, we get statements like those from Amber Rudd, the Energy Secretary, last year, that investing in nuclear power is what this government is all about for the next 20 years. I mean, quite an intense comment. So, it's not just, I mean, I'm not saying there's not scope for people to take a pro-nuclear position and do so in good faith and integrity. It's possible to do that, to be very optimistic about new generation reactors. Fourth generation will somehow be massively superior to generations 1, 2 and 3, even though the record is cost going up. It's a legitimate position to take. I think it's deeply wrong and can be refuted. But what's odd about the British debate is it's so skewed over towards that. So that, for instance, you can't, if you even try and envisage, and I've tried as an academic, to just put this on the table, as many colleagues have, many here, better than me, a non-nuclear future, you're regarded as way out on the margin. There's a debate about how much nuclear, but we definitely need nuclear. So there's a real dissonance, which I think we need to think about. The clue, I think, is in the clearly observable fact that the only countries in the world now who have large nuclear programs that even compare, albeit often less large than the UK's, and Steve knows much more about this than me and can correct or give more detail on it, are countries with some kind of stated nuclear ambition in the weapons area, especially the acquisition of nuclear-propelled submarines, which are regarded militarily as the only credible platform for strategic nuclear weapons because they are relatively covert and robust. And actually, when a colleague and I, Phil Johnson, started 4 years ago to look on the defence side in the UK at the debate in the Defence Select Committees, Ministry of Defence, reports, it's actually really, really clear that on the defence side, it is very well recognised, there's no controversy about it, that you cannot envisage the maintaining of what is called British submarine nuclear capabilities without the maintenance of a civil nuclear programme. It's not about plutonium. I mean, there are issues around plutonium. We've looked at that many years. Many people have done great work looking at fissile materials links, tritium, other special nuclear materials. But the issue here is actually skills. It's engineers. Where do the engineers come from? Where do the consulting companies, the design companies come from? The special metals, the skills to build nuclear reactors that Rolls-Royce has up in Derby to build the submarine reactors. Rolls-Royce, to keep them going, need business to build, as they've just concluded a deal, the steam generators for Hinkley Point. So it doesn't matter if you have a French company overseeing it, Chinese finance coming in, as long as British companies in the submarine supply chain have the chance to feed in their engineering skills. And this is very well documented in the military sector. The National Audit Office, in fact, when it's looked both at Trident and at Hinkley, it's very coy about going into any detail, and we can talk about it if anyone's interested, but there are statements in those reports which clearly show there are other strategic factors which it's not their job to look at, which is why Hinkley is imperative. And on the Trident side, there's an assumption that the cost of submarine industry is covered from elsewhere. Where is elsewhere? If the submarine industry is covered from elsewhere. This is an NAO report back in 2008. It's remarkable there's no real attention being given to some of these things, because the stakes are really high, because what that means effectively is that the elevated price from Hinkley is effectively a subsidy from electricity consumers over the 30-something years life of those contracts into an industry that will then be able to sustain the military nuclear submarine capability. So I think I'll probably put it... I think I'm worried about this, but I'm even more worried about what this says about the state of the debate in the UK. A lot of people make comments about the effect of a nuclear industry in any country on the political climate. But for me, I thought I was quite hard-nosed about how technology policy goes. I've worked in the area a long time. But I was shocked to see how we just are not discussing this in the UK. There is no British government document anywhere in the history of energy policy which acknowledges on the energy side what is clearly acknowledged on the military side. The criticisms aren't really being made, partly because it's kind of, I mean, we've talked about it here already, it's kind of obvious. But I think actually it's not just nuclear itself that is blocked from going obsolete by this imperative of weapons, which is so cherished in Whitehall. But there's actually a danger that, as a result of the concealment of this, the British democracy itself is in danger of going obsolete. Thanks a lot.